So, what's next for diplomacy? What might Iran's next moves be? And just how much damage has been inflicted on Iran's nuclear program? Well, we're joined now by General David Petraeus, who is the former director of the CIA, a position he held during a pivotal period. During his 37-year-long military career, he led key missions, including the Iraq surge, US Central Command and coalition forces in Afghanistan. He's also the co-author of the best-selling book, Conflict, The Evolution of Warfare from 1945 to Gaza. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you for joining us, General Petraeus.
Good to be with you, Tom.
You have described the damage inflicted by the United States and Israel on Iran's nuclear program as being very, very substantial. Would you go as far as to say it's been obliterated?
Well, I think there are some unknowns still that would lead me to stick with what I originally assessed as very, very substantial. That's a lot, obviously. We don't know, though, how much was done inside the mountain of Fordo. I think, again, very significant, but that'll require some time to determine. And we're not sure also whether there might be some of the highly enriched uranium, the 60% enriched uranium that may have been stored elsewhere outside of Natanz, Fordo, and possibly Esfahan, as well as some centrifuges that could enrich it further, of course, to weapons grade being over 90%. So I think that's the reason for hedging a bit on this. The bomb damage assessment process takes time. It takes all sources of intelligence, everything that you can bring together and synthesize, integrate, to reach a conclusion about how significant the damage actually has been and whether there still is some enrichment capacity and some highly enriched uranium to enrich.
Okay, so we still don't have all the evidence. We haven't got the full damage reports. Doesn't sound to me like you think we've seen the last of Iran's nuclear ambitions. What are your thoughts?
I think that's probably correct. In fact, what I would love to see now, the best case of all would be that Iran would agree to a nuclear accord that would essentially ban any enrichment of uranium in Iran. It would also allow the International Atomic Energy Agency to verify that, to oversee the process of the dismantling of all of their nuclear enrichment architecture, and allow them to go anywhere they want at any time in the process of so doing. I'm not sure that Iran will do that. I would suspect that that's probably not the case. But then I think Iran needs to do a little bit of reflection and recognize that it is in an exceedingly weak position, given that all of its air and ballistic missile defenses those have been obliterated, I think it's fair to say, given that not a single Israeli aircraft nor American aircraft was even hit, much less shot down during the 12 days of this campaign.
Do you think there's an element of risk here that perhaps these events might have accelerated Iran towards trying to create a nuclear deterrent? I mean, they could argue they need one more than ever, given what's happened in Iran in the last 2 weeks.
One can make that argument. Sure, there's risk in everything, but there's also enormous risk to them if they were to be revealed as doing that. And once again, you'd see another devastating air campaign unleashed on them. And keep in mind that when you put together Mossad, CIA, NSA, other intelligence organizations, there are quite good, as they say, insights into what's going on in Iran. After all, look at what Israel did to reportedly 14 nuclear scientists, all pinpointed and identified and taken out. The same with a number of the leaders of the military and then the Revolutionary Guards Corps and so forth. So that should give them considerable pause, I think, and probably they should conclude that it would be a very bad idea were they to try to enrich to weapons grade uranium.
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on that, I mean, I'd like to ask you, I mean, clearly very close coordination between Israel and the United States on intel, on military matters. How would you describe the overall mission and this joint force when it comes to collective intelligence?
Well, the intelligence and military relationships have always been very strong between the U.S. and Israel. And they were made even stronger when Israel was included as part of the U.S. Central Command, as opposed to the European Command, which was really sort of a hangover from the past. In a sense, I guess that they thought that the individual who's commanding Central Command should be focused, if you will, on the Arabs and others in the Middle East, and that European Command could look after the Israelis. That was changed a number of years ago. That relationship has improved ever since dramatically. Literally operating hand in glove when it comes to this kind of endeavor. And that's been very, very good, as it turns out, in operational terms, as we have seen with this very, very impressive 12-day campaign by Israel, and also the very impressive strikes by the United States.
And there was talk of a rift between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump in the weeks preceding the first Israel strikes. Do you think that rift was somehow manufactured to add a little bit more sort of a surprise element?
Not necessarily. There have been rifts between presidents of the U.S. and prime ministers of Israel as long as I can remember. There were rifts when I was the commander of Central Command, and we still had a relationship at that time, although they were not formally part of our area of responsibility. There was a rift when I was the director of the CIA, and it didn't affect the relationship with Mossad at all, nor did the rift previous to that affect the military relationship. Those have always been very, very strong, and they have clearly stayed very strong. One other point I might make about Iran sprinting to a bomb if they have some HEU left and some centrifuges that can enrich it. I don't believe that they have the capability anymore to metallize it. Esfahan, that facility, which was hit, was one of the three sites the U.S. hit. In this case, it was hit with cruise missiles launched from a submarine after Israel had already hit it very hard. That's the site where some critical parts of the enrichment process take place. They turn the uranium into something that can be actually enriched in the beginning, and then at the end of the process, if it's at weapons grade, they turn it into the kind of metal that can actually be shaped into a nuclear device. I don't think that they have that capability anymore as a result of the strikes on Esfahan. But again, that's another of the unknowns that is out there.
Sure. I mean, events move very quickly during the course of the last couple of weeks. I mean, within hours of an Iranian attack on a US military base here in the Middle East, President Trump was brokering a ceasefire with Iran. I mean, were you surprised by the pace of events? And did you think perhaps things were perhaps a little on the hasty side as far as President Trump's handling of all this?
I was a bit, to be candid, although there are, as always, elements of the decision-making process and factors that led to that aren't always clearly apparent to all the rest of us. One of those undoubtedly had to do with the opportunity for Israel to refurbish, to replenish its interceptor stocks for intercepting the Iranian missiles. Iran's missiles are dramatically reduced as a result of both their use and then a number of those that have been struck in warehouses and on launch pads, as have been their numbers of launchers. Nonetheless, that gets a bit concerning over time. You know, how many missiles and launchers does Iran have relative to how many interceptors does Israel have? And I'm sure that Israel is making the very most of this opportunity to manufacture more and more and more of those interceptors to be sure, absolutely certain, that they never run out before Iran does.
Do you ever offer any advice to the Trump administration? I mean, have you ever been asked for it? And is it at all common for a former CIA director to be asked for advice by an administration?
Well, yeah, in fact, the director of the CIA called me in a month or two ago. Supposed to be 30 minutes, and I left after an hour and 20 minutes. So, sure, those who served in positions before you did often will reach out. That's customary, and it takes place. Depends, obviously, on the relationship between the incumbent and the alumnus of that position.
Okay, that's interesting to know. I mean, just sort of before we move on from the 12-day war, as it's been dubbed, some people, and we spoke to John Bolton yesterday, former US National Security Advisor, seem to suggest perhaps they could have gone further. The Israelis and the Americans could have gone further and perhaps, quote, finished the job. Do you tend to agree with John Bolton?
I was just with him yesterday, as a matter of fact. In fact, we were on stage together at Aspen Ideas. I have generally been a bit more cautious about that than he has, the possibilities for that. Certainly, there are elements within Iran that might want to break off. That's something different than regime change, but that's something we should keep an eye on. There are obviously Kurds, there are Turkmen, there are Azeris, there are Arabs, there are Baluchis, and at least 4 of those 5 are contiguous to countries or regions, in the case of Kurdish regional government, that with which they might feel more affinity than the government in Tehran. When it comes to overall regime change, however, I think that's pretty tough to envision other than from within the regime. Typically, when these situations occur, when a regime is weakened to the point that it might be overthrown, the individual or group that's on top at the end of it when the dust settles is the one that has the most effective and charismatic leader and the most guys with the most guns. And in this case, there's no real opposition leader who has emerged. If he had, he'd be in prison or dead. Although we should note that Israel did bomb the entrance of the prison that holds most of the political prisoners of Iran. But again, there's not that figure out there. There's not the kind of robust organization, weapons, and so forth that could materialize. So I'm a bit cautious about the prospects for outside overthrow of this regime. But you could always envision someone inside the regime at a reasonably high position who could say, you know, this 86 or 87-year-old guy is about to die anyway. Why don't we influence the succession process a bit here, or something along those lines. But I think we should be cautious about hopes that this might usher in an opportunity for a Jeffersonian Democrat to ride in on a white horse and take over, and recognize that all of this support for proxies and nuclear enrichment and so forth has been incredibly damaging to their country.
Sure, and President Trump himself seemed hesitant and possibly anti-regime change, a bit like what you're saying. I mean, do you think, though, at the end of the 12-day war, Iran poses less of a threat to the region and to US interests than it did before the war started?
Oh, absolutely, sure. And you have to remember that over the course since 7 October, you've seen Hezbollah dramatically degraded. Its leadership not just decapitated at the very top, but decimated. Thousands of leaders had those pagers that blew up in their faces when they tried to decrypt that message that caused the explosion. And the next day, of course, their only remaining means of communication, the walkie-talkies, blew up as well. It is much, much reduced from what it was before. And because of the overthrow of the Bashar al-Assad regime, the murderous Iran ally, because he is gone to Moscow, presumably, now you have leadership in Syria, still very much an incomplete task to consolidate the control. But Syria is not an Iranian ally at this point in time and will not allow Iran, as Iran used to be able to do, to transit Syrian soil with weapons, ammunition, missiles, rockets, and the implements for making more in manufacturing facilities and bases that Iran controlled in Syria. So that's a very significant change also.
Sure.
Beyond that, Hamas obviously is dramatically degraded. That is by no means over. There's still a lot of work to do, and the 3 objectives that Prime Minister Netanyahu set out to achieve still have not been achieved, nor has a 4th one that I believe should be achieved, and that is to provide a better life for the Palestinian people in Gaza without Hamas in their lives. And the strategy they're employing will not achieve the first 3, much less the final 4th one. And then the Shia militia in Iraq seem to be taking a knee to a degree, perhaps trying to avoid some kind of upset in the months leading up to the election there. and the Houthis seem to be a bit degraded as well. And I doubt that Iran has much to share with any of them at this point, having been so substantially degraded itself. And keep in mind, again, that Iran's air and ballistic missile defense, for all intents and purposes, has been obliterated. And that means that Israel, if it needs to, can fly at will once again above Iran, as long as it stays out of the range of the heavy machine gun air defense weapons, and inflict further damage on Iran as is necessary.
And just mentioning Syria there, as you did, I just wonder what you thought of reports that Israel could normalize ties with Syria and Lebanon. I mean, is that something you would expect to see perhaps during the months ahead?
It would be a wonderful development, I think. Lebanon clearly is still a relatively new government. The degradation of Hezbollah and reduction of its influence allowed the selection of a president after a year of wrangling, allowed the parliament to move forward, allowed the Lebanese armed forces to move into that area between the northern border of Israel and the Litani River, the area from which Hezbollah was raining down rockets on Israeli citizens, some 70 or 80,000 of whom were not able to stay in their homes for well over a year. But let's see how the political situation develops there. Likewise in Syria, I've been impressed that the leader who overthrew Bashar al-Assad, who I should acknowledge was in our detention facility in Iraq during the surge, then to be sure was with ISIS, then broke off from them, Al-Qaeda, and then broke off from them. He is saying the right things, and I think we should give him every opportunity to actually implement what it is that he has been saying, which in essence is to say that this should be a government that represents all the peoples of Syria, a country through which, as you know, many of the ethnic and sectarian and tribal fault lines of the Middle East run, and that there should indeed be majority rule, but also minority rights very clearly guarded. And I'd love to see that come about in Syria after many decades of the Assads running it as their own little fiefdom in a very, very brutal and murderous fashion.
One of the things that emerged in the run-up to the US strikes on Iran's nuclear sites was a lot of debate about whether or not the United States should get involved in what was perceived as being potentially another forever war in a faraway land. I mean, this aversion in the United States amongst the public and amongst people in President Trump's own party seems to be a legacy, doesn't it, of what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Sure it does. Yeah. No, those are long wars. They were tough. We, by the way, didn't need to leave Afghanistan when we did. That was very sustainable. That was a big mistake. And I said so publicly at the time that we would come to regret it. And I hope that we have. We've plunged the country back into the kind of 7th or 8th century interpretation of ultra-conservative Islam, to the regret, I am sure, of at least 50% of the population, if not much more than that. But be that as it may, those are tough, long, hard wars. We did have Iraq in a very good position when our final combat forces left in late 2011. And tragically, the government of Iraq then pursued highly sectarian actions that undid a good bit of what it is that we all had fought together and sacrificed together to achieve. Regardless, those were tough. And I think you have lessons of the most visceral experiences that one has seen during one's lifetime. And this is a case where that is true. In fact, I wrote my PhD dissertation at Princeton on the American military and the lessons of Vietnam, another very tough war, which actually overshadowed some of what we did early on in Iraq, to its detriment, I would add as well.
Yeah, but do you think the fact that the US public is a bit war weary and they're fed up with these forever wars is the right driver to shape US foreign policy? Isn't it the wrong way round?
Well, it depends on what it is you're contemplating. I mean, Syria is not a long war for the United States. We have no boots on the ground. There's no intent to overthrow the regime, as was the explicit case in both Afghanistan, because the Taliban refused to turn over al-Qaeda. They were sheltering, and because, of course, the murderous regime of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. This is a totally different war. People should recognize that. I think President Trump has gone to some lengths to explain that, because there is a part of each party in the United States that is, again, absolutely averse to anything that would look like in Iraq or in Afghanistan again. But this is all part of understanding the domestic sources, the domestic factors that play into the determination of foreign policy, not just in the United States, but in any country.
And do you think President Trump should try to engage with Iran? Do you think the Trump administration will engage with Iran? I mean, there's talk about perhaps an Iranian delegation visiting the White House. Do you see that as likely?
Well, I think there should be some preliminaries before that happens, to be sure. But no, I think there should be engagement with Iran. It would be wonderful, again, if the Iranian leadership could recognize how ruinous their policies have been for the people of Iran, 80% of whom presumably oppose what the regime has done and how it has gone about it. This is a country with extraordinary potential that has repeatedly failed to live up to that potential because they're too busy trying to cause mischief and problems and mayhem in other parts of the region. We should recognize, by the way, as well, that Israel is truly changed because of 10-7 in its strategic outlook. It will never again allow a threat to materialize, not just in neighboring countries, but also in the region if it has the capabilities that Iran has demonstrated. So I think absolutely they should sit down. They should absolutely give up their nuclear effort. If they want to do civilian nuclear power, we or others can provide the uranium to fuel that. But otherwise, they should have no nuclear enrichment, and the IAEA should have full rights to go anywhere at any time to verify that that establishment has been completely dismantled.
Aren't you concerned, though, that Israel has slightly overreached when you consider all of the campaigns that Israel's been involved in across the region, Yemen, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, the Palestinian territories? I mean, does that sound to you like overreach?
It sounds to me like the response of a country that has experienced the most horrible day in its entire history, the worst day for Jews since the Holocaust, the worst intelligence mistake in their entire history, and there were others, of course, the Yom Kippur War among them, the worst military readiness failure, the response was wholly inadequate, and the worst political miscalculation. And that's why I mentioned they have changed their strategic outlook, and I think that that is appropriate. Think about what took place on that day, what they experienced, the losses. Keep in mind that we lost not quite 3,000 on 9/11. The equivalent losses for us of what they sustained for their population would be over 40,000 killed and 7,000 taken hostage. So no, I don't think that that is necessarily overreach. Iran has long been at the root of all of these problems as well, with its murderous proxies. I should note that hundreds and hundreds of American soldiers were killed in Iraq by the explosively formed penetrators that the Quds Force of the Revolutionary Guards Corps provided to Iraqi Shia militia who were funded, trained, and guided by those in Tehran.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, just to wrap up this conversation, overall, how would you rate the Trump administration on foreign policy? Does the world feel like a safer place with President Trump in the White House?
Well, I think it's still very much a work in progress. We saw an astonishing gathering of NATO leaders, for example, just last week. I don't think anyone ever could have imagined that a U.S. president could get NATO leaders to do what they did, which was to commit to not just 2% of GDP on defense, but to 3.5%. Yes, it's over a period of time, to be sure, but that is very, very encouraging. And for me in particular, having been a NATO guy, if you will, having a NATO hat position as a 1-star, 3-star, 4-star, while also having a U.S. hat, and having watched repeatedly presidents of either party in the U.S. rail at the insufficient spending on defense by Europeans, and all of a sudden you see them make that commitment. And it'll be 5% if you add in other ancillary actions and tasks that help support the movement of combat power to the Eastern Front, if you will, in Europe and so on. So I think that's very, very significant. The tariffs very much still out there waiting to be resolved. The sooner, of course, that they can be resolved, the better. The smaller that they are in general, also very much the better. That's still quite disruptive, and it creates enormous uncertainty among consumers in the United States as well as countries overseas that are dependent on trade with the United States. In the Middle East, I think, again, still very much a work in progress, but a very encouraging set of results from that particular work.
Okay, well, we've covered a number of topics. We could have covered a number more, but thank you very much in the meantime to General David Petraeus, former director of the CIA. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to Al Arabiya English.
Thank you, Tom.